Hey composers, it's Heyde here, and today we are doing yet another VST review. This one is from Orange Tree Samples, and if you know Orange Tree, that's because they are the very first VST company I ever worked for. But I really love this group of people. They are so good to me, and I really appreciate them working with me for so long, for so many years. They also make really great VSTs, and the one we're talking about today is called the Evolution Rubber Bridge Guitar. Now, I hadn't heard of this guitar when they sent it to me, but it's really interesting and I really like the sound. It's got kind of this palm muty effect that I think is really interesting and could yield itself to a lot of different styles of music. They told me that it's primarily used these days in country and folk, but I actually decided to kind of take it in a different direction and compose something totally different for it. So I'm gonna show you the demo that I wrote, but before I do that, I'm actually gonna play through the instrument itself and talk about sort of the user interface, how it sort of sounds, some of the different articulations, and things that kind of caught my eye. If you enjoy this video, as always, you can leave a like, it really helps me out. Subscribe for more content like this, and we'll just jump right in. Okay, so this is a standard interface for all of Orange Tree's stuff. It should look very familiar to you Orange Tree users, but just to kind of recap in case you don't know, basically we have these tabs on the top. We have play, strum, chords, tone, and setup. Now, I personally don't use strum and chords very much when I compose. That goes for Orange Tree as well as other VST companies. I prefer to do that stuff manually. But before we do that, let's get into the play. I'm gonna load up a couple presets so you can hear what this sounds like. So you can hear it's got this kind of palm muted effect, which is really, really cool. Now that's not actually a palm mute. This would be the palm mute. If I bump this up. But the sound itself has that kind of sound. Okay, let's try another preset. Super cool. Okay, another one. Here's an example of it, kind of more distorted. Now there's also, you'll hear some of this built-in real legato that's matching based on how a guitar would actually play, whether it would use a different string or if it would keep the same string. And you can see that visually here represented. Also, incredibly responsive. I love how responsive Orange Tree stuff is. Really, really good. One more sound, and then we'll move on. So lots of different kind of variances in here. Okay, now let's show you the different articulations. Let's go back to the Blues Man. I like that one. Okay, so we have sustain, we have palm mute, and again, you can control these different parameters. So if I wanted palm mute activated at a higher velocity, I would just raise that up. And now it's active there. You can also change it, like let's say we want it to be activated by the sustain pedal, we could do that. So when sustain pedal is down, it'll do palm mute. And when it's up, it'll be sustained. Pretty cool. You could do it with CC values. You could have it with key switching, other parameters. I mostly just use velocity personally. Okay, now we have mute, which sounds like this. We have harmonics, which I like to use. I have to make sure that these are turned off to really... Now you're getting different ones depending on if it's actually using a true harmonic versus what we call an artificial harmonic. So some of these notes won't actually activate full harmonics. We have grace note up and down, which I don't really use personally because the legatos are so well programmed, but if you want that, grace note down. We have buzz trills, and buzz trills have to be activated actually with a key switch. And then we should get that. It's kind of similar to the grace notes. Again, these are ones that I don't really use too much, to be honest. Velocity slide, I think, is a useful one personally. So if we have that activated, it'll basically keep that slide going as we play. Really cool. So I like that one a lot. There's other ways you can activate that too. We have octaves. Pretty cool. And then power chords. I like that the strumming's a little bit off too. It feels realistic. So those are a couple of the articulations. There's a ton, like I showed you. I don't have to go through all of them. Next, we have the strum feature, which again, I don't use too much personally, but you can basically initiate different strumming patterns. So if we go to a different preset and then we actually play and we set this key switch, so and it'll activate based on the tempo of our piece. So because the tempo of my piece is a little bit on the fast side, it's sounding a little clunky, but and there's a bunch of different patterns in here that you could choose from, of course, to get what you're looking for. Yeah, now I prefer to program this stuff in manually. So we'll move on. We won't talk too much about that. The chord section kind of works in conjunction with the strum. So basically when I'm playing over here and I have the strum and I'm doing some chord like this, here's not totally realistic sounding, and that's partially because the voicings of the chord aren't really realistic to how this would be played. So over on the chord section, if you go automatic chords, it'll interpret, based on the notes you're playing, what kind of chord you're going for and what would sound most realistic in that voicing. So it sounds a little better with this. So a little bit more realistic. You can kind of use them in tandem. Next up, we have the tone, which, again, I don't mess with too much because I like to use the presets, but this is essentially how the presets are being created. So if you want to kind of finesse or create your own, this is how you would do it. So you have different amps in here, some delays, some reverbs, and they all sound really good, too. So we can mess with whatever we want here. Lots of different settings in here for you. And then lastly, we have setup, which is just basically more of the logistical stuff. There's a bunch of settings in here for signal blend, the stereo width. I think that's a useful one. One of my favorite settings in here is the multi-tracking. So you could move from a single track, which is the standard in most of these, to double track. And now you'll hear it stereo panned if you've got headphones on. You can also use quad track. It's a common recording technique when you're doing guitars to have it recorded 4 times. You get a lot more oomph out of it, which I used in my track, which I'll show you. And you can control things like the humanization of that, the type of picking style. Another useful feature in here that I use quite a bit is the actual alternate tuning. So we could do like drop C, for example. And that's useful if you want to get some extra lower notes. And then other settings like when you want things to actually activate in terms of like the legato range, we have it to major seconds, which is, I think, the default. Some settings about the open string legatos, other settings that you can kind of mess with. I won't go through all these things because there's a ton. There's a ton. And you can read the manual if you want to. So let's give you a little playthrough of this. It's called the Enigma Machine, and I called it that because it's got lots of wacky time signatures and is very kind of strange in terms of its harmony. So we'll play through it and then talk about it a little bit. to pause there. If you want to hear the rest, you can hear it on the website, Orange Tree's website. I'll link that in the description. Now, let's just kind of solo out some of specifically the ones that I used that were the rubber bridge guitar. So there's a couple other instruments in here. Some of them are Orange Tree, like the vibraphone, the bass, one of the electric guitars. And then we have the Orange Tree, like rubber bridge stuff. That's kind of the foundation of this piece. So just to solo out some of that on its own so you can really hear it in action. Here's some of that. Okay, so here's a couple of the patches that I used and how I used them. I started the whole piece off by just having this one little ostinato in here. Ostinato is a repeated pattern. And that's just actually using one of their presets, as is, I think, all of these, just a preset, activating between mostly palm mutes. The foundation of this piece is really this little, like, weird riff. Yes. Which is, again, using the coarse grind patch, but alternating between the palm mutes and the sustains. So on the last note, it actually goes to sustain, and that's triggered by velocity with a little bit of modulation to get some vibrato. Which I thought would be kind of a cool little effect. Now, one of the things I like to use is this stereo panning. And so you hear in between those phrases, you hear this kind of thing. And that's triggered by this stereo run thing that I created. That's basically just a double-tracked guitar. It's called Fried Tubes, and it's a sustain. The double track is what makes it really distinct and noticeable. This kind of just kind of stands out a little bit against the rest of the instruments. Comes here too. And that kind of almost like Spanish sounding riff at the end. I kind of like to have that variance to kind of create this contrast between the different instruments. This is also happening. It's bottom dollar. I really picked these settings arbitrarily. Another really active instrument I have going on in here is this more gritty, kind of distorted sounding thing. It's the Blues Man again. No wonder I like that one. Happens here. And that, as you can hear, is the velocity slide. That's what I really like about some of these patches is the velocity slide. It's super cool when you can have that controlled like that. And it just, I don't know, it just adds an interesting quality. So you can kind of hear it kind of swell up as this goes. Now here, I introduced some of the harmonics. Again, using a preset because that's just how it is. Coarse grind yet again. There's a lot of textures you can get out of this. And that just sounds like this. With a little bit of delay that I threw in from Echo Boy. Now here is where we get some of the other instrumentation that's not the rubber bridge guitar, and that's just because I wanted that contrast. But even if I just solo out the rubber bridge guitars, you'll hear that's kind of carrying the majority of it. So everything else is just sweetener. Those instruments were the crux of basically this entire piece. Once I kind of have my palette set, I don't like to move too much farther from that. Sometimes having a confined palette can be really useful. It gives you a more restrained sound to your music, and you're not kind of going all over the place. You actually kind of focused in and directed. And in this case, because it was a VST review, I wanted to make sure it was really focusing in on these instruments. What I think I'd really get out of this VST library after playing with it is this kind of experimental approach. The sound to me of this library is very unique and kind of reminds me of some of the things I like out of like palm muted pianos or prepared pianos. And in that way, you know, because I don't write folk or indie or country music as much, I personally think that I'm going to be using this for more experimental contexts, and that's something that I think is really intriguing and interesting to me because most of my guitar libraries are geared towards more traditional stuff. So if you want to hear the rest of that audio demo, I'm going to link that in the description along with more info about this VST so you can check it out. I think it's a really cool instrument. I'm excited to use this more in my music. And again, I want to give a huge thank you to Orange Tree Samples for letting me play around with this thing and use it. I hope you found this helpful and interesting or inspiring. If you did, please leave a like. It really helps me out. Subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.